section of Senator Estrada that the license plate backlog, not only for motorcycles but also for other motor vehicles, started way before this doble placa law. So how come we seem to have blamed this law for the backlog, Mr. President? So it is not, the law is not to be blamed for the backlog.
No, Mr. President. As I have said, one of the reasons for the filing of this measure was to lessen the administrative burden of the Land Transportation Office. And sinabi ko po kahapon, una, hindi nga natin maipatupad yung batas. Napakahirap ipatupad yung batas dahil hindi makakakomply yung mga may-ari ng motorsiklo dahil wala ngang plaka. So we have reached a chicken and egg situation wherein the rider himself would blame the administrative body implementing the law for the lack of plates, and then the rider blaming the LTO, and then the LTO being overburdened, blaming the sheer number of new vehicles. So hindi na po magkaintindihan to, natabunan na ho yung LTO ng trabaho. Hindi na nila maintindihan kung ano yung gagawin. So dati nasa harapan lang ay decal, tapos magiging plaka. So palagay ko po, we have here an administrative situation that has resulted into a no-win situation for the LTO and the riders themselves.
With the indulgence of
Yes,
the sponsor,
Mr. President.
one of the reasons that we introduced this amendment is because of the backlog. There are, as you can see, there are about 9 million motorcycles that have no plates. And as you mentioned yesterday, dear minority leader, that nako-confuse ka rin, no? There are different kinds of plates, di ba? Temporary, yung MR lang nakalagay, plastic plate. So, we think that if we are to consider the peace and order issue, mas mahirap po yung walang plaka kaysa po hintayin natin makumpleto yung doble plaka, no? So it is more, the motorcycles will be prone more to being used for crime because there are simply no plates yet, no? Yung mga official, as you can see, malayo naman po yung new plate numbers compared to the old plate numbers. It's more readable right now.
And Mr. President, itong sinasabi natin backlog of plates, yung mga figures dyan, mga numbers, these are the backlog in the metal plates. Tama po ba?
Correct, Mr. President. And Mr. President,
yes, Mr. President.
if it's metal plate for the rear, there would also be a corresponding backlog of decals for the front.
Decal plates, which is the one required by the doble placa. Is that a metal plate?
No, it's a
Correct.
It's a
it's a
decal.
sticker, Mr. President.
Yes, it's a sticker, Mr. President. So, we are all when we talk about the backlog, which is backlog in metal plates, in the same breath we mentioned the doble placa law. It has nothing to do with the backlog in the metal plates, Mr. President. Because the second plate is actually a sticker, not a metal plate. So, Mr. President, why will this measure, if it is meant to address the backlog, why will an anti-crime measure, amendment of an anti-crime measure, address a metal plate backlog? Please enlighten us, Mr. President.
Well, since this law was put on hold since the time of President Duterte, back then, because the LTO is also having a hard time producing that much decals, no? So, with the LTO said that it will be better that if they concentrate on the rear plate numbers instead of them also looking at the decals, no? Inaano lang na gusto na matapos na lang muna yung rear plates before.
If it's, and then Mr. President, if it's a decal, a sticker, how come pumasok ang aerodynamic argument, Mr. President?
Mr. President,
Yung tsaka the flying object argument, Mr. President.
Well, actually, that was one of the sa IRR that was because of the concern. The LTO deemed it necessary just to...
We have seen the IRR. Ang
Yes.
ginamit din yata sa
Decal.
IRR, decal din.
Decal
So,
na po.
and
Yes.
are we fixed with the meaning of decal? Is that a metal plate or a paper or a sticker, a
Sticker.
special kind of paper? So, I don't think the aerodynamic argument, Mr. President, being a flying object is really much of a concern if it's just a sticker, Mr. President.
Yes, that is correct because yung old law, the original law was supposedly 2 metal plates.
2 metal plates. That's why during the IRR formulation, because of the concerns, they adopted a decal. But the decal, Mr. President, would likewise be meaningless because there is no appropriate place for the decal. Because the decal, by using a decal, you have to have it wrapped around. So, wrap around po, Mr. President. If the decal is also as big as this, you have to wrap
Hindi,
it
pero yung
around.
decal-
So, hindi na rin makikita, Mr. President, yung number. Kasi
And if also, if I may interject,
binalot mo na doon sa poste ng motor, sa fork.
Smaller size.
A little small.
The decal should be smaller. Also 135 mm versus or by 85 mm.
in lieu of the
Yes.
decals, it was the RFID system that was already proposed to be installed in front so that it will be used also for future, if we can already have the scanners and the command center for easier and the checkpoints, no? It will be easier to verify that plate number is really belongs to that motor vehicle, to that motorcycle.
Mr. President, ito po yung This is the wording in the law. RA 11235. Section 5, fourth paragraph. The readable number plates must be displayed in both the front and back sides of a motorcycle and shall be made of suitable and durable material as determined by the LTO. And then the LTO has already made the determination in the implementing rules and regulations. Ano ba date nito? May 11, 2020. Ang ginamit po nila is the decal plate. Shall be yung nasa harap. So, the decal plate is already reveals to us the material. It's not metal, Mr. President. So, I hope that we are very clear with what's happening, Mr. President. Let's not use yung reasons which are not applicable. Nami-mislead po kami na nakikinig po.
Mr.
Ngayon,
President,
ang nangyayari po, ganito po ang masama rito. Ang masama rito, ginawa na nga ng LTO, in-IRR na nila so that it's implementable, metal sa likod, decal sa harap, and then they suspended the law because it is not implementable. Is that the reason given by the LTO for suspending the law?
yes, because of the backlog.
Yes, but is it because of the law or is it because of the backlog? And the backlog is caused by what? A lack of contract, a lack of supplier, lack of materials, or lack of equipment, lack of manpower? What is it, Mr. President?
So, Mr. President, let me clarify this. The law, as it stands today, speaks of doble placa metals, Mr. President, as I have shown.
Hindi, Mr. President,
And then-
kaya ko binasa, it's
Yes,
not necessarily metal, Mr. President.
The law, but
No,
the
I read the law.
but the LTO perhaps admitting that they cannot
Hindi suitable.
they cannot produce and have this installed in front, adopted the decal system. So it's again a system of our IRR overstepping and redefining the law itself. So this measure, Mr. President, would make the application of the law implementable on the part of the land transportation office without inducing the land transportation office to amend the law.
No, Mr. President, what I read yung sinabi kong fourth paragraph ng section 5 is not IRR, it's the law.
Can we have it repeated,
yes.
Mr. President, for
The readable number plates must be
Yes.
displayed in both the front and back sides of a motorcycle and shall be made of suitable and durable material as
Yes.
determined by the LTO.
Yes, it
So we
speaks of
delegated it to the LTO.
it speaks of plates, and that because of the brouhaha generated, Mr. President, the LTO deemed it necessary to just have a decal. They adjusted it. They
and
adjusted
the
it.
LTO calls it decal plate.
That's the
So it's a
stickers.
plate also, Mr. President, in the terminology of the LTO. So it's not really, the law does not require two metal plates. Sinabi lang niya, there will be two readable number plates of material determined by the LTO. Sabi ng LTO siguro, taking into account yung aerodynamic ninyo, if it's metal, sabi niya, decal plate. So, if we are fixed with the meaning of decal, because decal, ano what's the meaning of decal in the dictionary? Give us a minute, Mr. President. We will look at the meaning of decal in the dictionary.
Yes, session suspended. Session is assumed.
Okay, so Mr. President, it was established during the break that our bill will really change the rule that there will be no more requirement of plates being displayed in both the front and the back sides of a motorcycle. It will only be a plate at the back side and then in the front side an RFID. So, but then of course, Mr. President, we need to address the backlog in the actual production of the metal plates then, as well as be concerned with the production of the RFIDs, which will have to be paired with a specific metal plate, Mr. President. So, hindi po ito, at any rate, we have established that this bill is not the solution to the metal plates backlog kasi involved din naman dun yung motor vehicles and not only motorcycles. So, we have called the attention of the LTO to find ways and improve their systems. I think even during the break, it was established that there is no more legal obstacle, Mr. President. The reason for the backlog is not anymore a court order or any legal document, but it's a matter of the production actually producing the plates. May we know who is the head of the LTO now, Mr. President?
If I'm not mistaken, it's a certain attorney, Bigor Mendoza. He's been in I think I've met him once in my lifetime when I was with the MMDA. He's transport man. He used to head a transport cooperative or a transport organization years ago.
Thank you for the information, Mr. President. I think he already served the government before, and was he also a former congressman, Mr. President?
He was yes.
Party list?
He was a party list representative, Mr. President.
So thank you, Mr. President. And then I joined the measure's intention to lower the penalties, Mr. President, especially for infractions which are not related to intent to commit a crime. Kasi sabi natin this should also, if not totally eradicate, lessen the discrimination being felt by our motorcycle riders. Ayun po, magkaisa po tayo doon.
Thank you,
Sana nga
Mr.
pati
President.
hindi lang sa penalties, but the fact that the reality that they are being stopped, Mr. President, the same road, same time, same day, and yet the four-wheel vehicle is not stopped. The two-wheel vehicle is being stopped, Mr. President. But maybe pang-PNP na yan to tell us what is the law enforcement theory behind that, Mr. President.
I don't know, Mr.
Yes,
President.
it's for the PNP to tell us.
It's a Netflix scene that motorcycles are more agile and easily maneuverable. When you watch James Bond movies, they can run even through your unusual steps, ladders, etc., Mr. President.
So if that be the case, Mr. President, then maybe it's also wise for us to equip our law enforcers with the motorcycles.
They're being trained. The Highway
Yeah.
Patrol Group is very consistent in training. Even civilians are being trained,
Yes,
Mr. President.
So mahahabol po nila yung mga perpetrators of crime.
Yes, Mr. President. They can even run on one wheel, Mr. President, with the front wheel being raised, Mr. President.
Ano yung mga penalties natin? So, Mr. President, let us just allow us to point out some of the penalties. For example, yung failure to report lost, damage, or stolen number plate or RFID within 72 hours from discovery, ang punishment niya, fine of not more than 10,000. But yung isa, if the lost, damage, or stolen number plate or readable number plate or RFID sticker is used in connection with an offense penalized under the revised penal code or special penal laws, the failure of the owner of the motorcycle to report within 3 days that the motorcycle is lost or damaged or stolen is also a fine of not more than 5,000 pesos. So, parang ulitin ko, if the act is connected with the commission of a crime, knowingly, so we should punish it more than just the the innocent act of an infraction of our numerous rules, Mr. President, under the law. Meron pa ngang isa, Mr. President, yung erasing, tampering, altering, forging, imitating, covering, or concealing a number plate or readable number plate. The penalty is imprisonment ranging from 2 years and 1 day to 6 years and fine of not more than 10,000 pesos. Okay, yan. Pero yung intentional use of the erased, tampered, altered, forged, imitated, covered, or concealed number plate or readable number plate, the penalty is merely a fine of not more than 10,000 pesos. So yung isa, you're tampering with the plate, Mr.
Correct.
President. So imprisonment and fine. Yung isa, you knowingly, you know that it is a tampered plate and you use it, and the penalty is only a fine of 10,000 pesos. So if we could just review the penalties, Mr. President.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes, Mr. President, the difference that on the second part, it's now being used as the instrument itself to commit the crime, di ba?
Yes.
Mr. President. So the other one is the person who was. The second one is the motorcycle was used as an instrument. The first one was the person was instrumental
Correct.
in tampering, altering, forging, imitating, etc., etc. Not necessarily being the principal in using the motorcycle as an instrument of the crime.
Correct.
He just facilitated the tampering of the serial number, etc., etc. But the criminal act, although the first one was also a criminal act, the main criminal act was done by the person who knowingly used the motorcycle as an instrument whose serial number was tampered by the other person. But that can be the same person, Mr. President. That can be the same person. The one who tampered can be the actor itself perpetrating the crime. So
Let's just review the penalties and
the
then,
penalties. So
let's make it commensurate to the gravity of the offense, Mr. President.
yes. So in the second part, the idea of Your Honor is to increase it.
Yes, yung isa parang
I agree.
yes.
I agree.
Let's just revisit. Now, my final point, Mr. President, which is a matter of law, if not constitutional law. Ito po ang ating Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act, which is RA 11235, was enacted on March 8, 2019.
Yes.
It was suspended in April, March 2019, suspended in April, temporarily daw, but apparently nung lumalabas, suspended up to today, so mukhang permanent na. Suspended in April 2019 by the LTO. Because on July 1, 2020, the LTO issued a memo suspending the implementation of the law indefinitely. My question, Mr. President, should we allow an administrative agency to suspend a law, Mr. President? Ang hirap-hirap pong magpasa ng law. Tingnan mo lang ito yung interpellation natin ngayon, itong law nyo. Ang hirap-hirap, 2 chambers pa po yan. Hinalal pa ng taong bayan, elected by the people. Tayo, nationwide. Yung congressmen, party list yung iba, districts yung iba. Then we pass a law. We got the concurrence of the president. Hindi niya binito. And then an agency of the government suspends it, Mr. President. So, hindi na ako nakatingin sa laman. Ha? Let us not look at the contents of the law. But as to the power exercised by that agency, shall we allow that, Mr. President?
No, Mr. President. No, Mr. President. I share your opinion. I am of the same opinion that administrative agencies are there to implement the law, execute the law as enacted by the Congress, and Congress should likewise continue with its oversight functions as to the execution of the law. And the non-execution of a law validly enacted by Congress, and here we're treading on the constitutional realm, should likewise and can likewise be subjected into a mandamus action on the part of any citizen, Mr. President, that they should implement the law. The administrative agency, the executive department, for that matter, cannot refuse to implement a law validly enacted by Congress. So, in effect, Mr. President, this is not just a mere administrative fiasco because they're now claiming that they don't have the machines. There was a TRO issued but now lifted. But this is a defiance to an act of Congress, an act made by the representatives of the people, though not vetoed by the chief executive, was in effect being vetoed by non-execution and non-compliance by the Land Transportation Office. So tama po kayo, yung pinaghirapan natin dito, pag hindi nila pinatupad kung ano-anong alibay, kung ano-anong dahilan, para na rin silang nag-veto. Hindi mo na natin to patutupad. Ayaw namin, napakahirap. So administratively, perhaps, Mr. President, if the gentleman is suggesting the concerned agency should be taken to task, the budgetary process can be utilized, or the proper administrative measures, sanctions, the ombudsman could step in. But tayo nyo ipatupad. The law may be hard to implement, but it's your job to implement. The Congress took into consideration all these intricacies.
Correct.
Yung napakahirap na pagpapatupad nito. So, hindi pa ho ito COVID 2019. 2020 si COVID, March 2020 to be precise. So, wala po hong dahilan bakit hindi sila mag-exert ng effort para ipatupad. Baka hindi lang po ito, Mr. President. Baka ito po ay eye-opener lang sa atin. Baka marami pa ho tayong
Mr. President,
batas na hindi pinatupad.
can we ask the LTO who signed the memo dated July 1, 2020? Ito na. This is the one formally suspending the implementation of the law indefinitely. So what kind of power was exercised, Mr. President? Superpower po yan.
So, Mr. President, in compliance with your Honor's question, I retrieve a document coming from, this is a Xerox copy of a document dated July 1, 2020. This is now the COVID period. So, the reason, Mr. President, why the Land Transportation Office, through its head, Assistant Secretary Galvante, issued this memorandum addressed to all regional directors deferring the implementation of Republic Act 11235 is because of the non-availability of motorcycle plates and decals compounded by the continuing health crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. Naging reason na nila ngayon yung COVID. So this is July 1, April, May, June, July. So after more than 3 months, ang ginamit ng reason is the COVID-19 pandemic resulting in the limited operational capacity of our offices. And because of this, to allow owners, I'm reading the last line, to allow owners ample time to process their transactions while observing social distancing and health and sanitary protocols. So, ginamit na po itong COVID.
With the indulgence of the
Hindi na,
sponsor,
yes.
Mr. President.
if I may remember it right, it was President Duterte who first issued the memo, executive order to suspend the implementation of the
It's not mentioned, Mr. President, even
But
in
it was, I think,
in this memorandum of the LTO. So if that were the case, this Assistant Secretary would have mentioned the executive order. Wala.
Yung first, I think yung first, unfortunately, Senator Bongo is not here, but I think he would attest that it was, so the LTO can attest also that it was President Duterte who first issued an order for the suspension of...
No, Mr. President, kung nangyari yan earlier, ako, Assistant Secretary, gagawa ng memo na ganito, I will mention the executive order. Wala. There's no mention of any
I totally
executive
agree.
order.
I totally agree that there was a deferment just signed by the Assistant Secretary of Land Transportation Office. But the representative of the LTOs is nodding his head. Apparently, there was also a presidential directive. Was there a presidential directive? He's now blinking his eyes, not
Can
nodding
we
his
get
head.
a minute suspension,
One
Mr.
minute
President?
suspension,
Suspended.
Mr. President.
And or to the Department of Transportation, which are responsible for the non-implementation or non-observance of the law, of these laws, Mr. President?
If I may, if the indulgence of the sponsor, because I'm the author of the Speed Limiters Act, that was implemented and passed, I think, one of the very first laws that we were able to pass, 2014, 2015, as because of the numerous fatal bus crashes, no, because of overspeeding and recklessness. But from what I know, it is being implemented in the newer model buses and the newer model bigger trucks already come with speed limiters. No? Kaya po, hindi na kinakailangan mag-install. If you notice also, there's a significant drop in the fatal crashes already involving public utility buses. I think the LTO
Does the LTO confirm those facts, Mr. President?
I think they're nodding their head.
Sige, we don't have access to them. Basta, yan po, at least those are 3 laws. Just I recall, Mr. So, plus the doble placa law. So, siguro it would be worth our while to look at the actuations of the LTO, Mr. President, as far as enforcing the various laws that we have passed, and then inventory na rin po natin ano ba yung mga laws na sinuspend nila on their own, Mr. President, or to use their language, defer until further notice the implementation of the IRR. So ganun po nangyayari. To make it appear that they're exercising a power within their jurisdiction, so it's just to defer the implementation of their own IRR. Okay, but when you defer the IRR, do you make that as the excuse that you will not implement the law? In effect, ganun din yun, Mr. President.
Yes, I totally agree, Mr. President, to the good minority leader. In fact, during the last Congress, I recall having delivered a privileged speech entitled, "The Water Cannot Rise Higher Than the Source." It has something to do with the conflict between the IRR and the law itself. Mr. President, my proposal then during the last Congress was to create a Senate Select Committee to really determine which laws were implemented, not implemented, no IRRs issued, IRRs in conflict with the law, IRRs holding the implementation of the law, and then the non-implementation of the law, Mr. President. I still I still would want to pursue that initiative, Mr. President, not just because of the seeming penchant of the Land Transportation Office, not just the Land Transportation Office, other government agencies, to really disobey the Congress, Mr. President. The job of the executive branch is to implement the law. The job of the judicial branch is to suspend the implementation if it is not in congruence with the Constitution. But what is happening here now is that we have a fourth branch, Mr. President, a fourth branch, a branch that can issue a TRO, suspend the implementation, a branch that can amend the law, higher than the Congress, a branch that can interpret their own rules, similar to the Supreme Court. So what do we do with Mr. President? This is not sui generis in terms of the LTO is concerned. Lahat po siguro. Lahat ginagawa yan ng mga umaabuso. That's why the job of the Congress now, the Senate, is to really oversee, to oversee and to make it sure that our laws are really being implemented to the letter by the administrative agencies, Mr. President. I totally agree. I totally agree.
So let's make it off record, Mr. President, that the law which was suspended is actually the Motorcycle Crime Prevention Act. Pang-crime prevention po ito. Actually, ngayon ko lang nare-realize na nabigyan kasi siya ng medyo negative connotation, doble plaka law. Hindi naman Nandoon binasa natin yung fourth paragraph ng Section 5 Suitable material. Hindi naman kailangan metal yung nasa harap So, yan po ang masakit dito It's a crime prevention measure and it was administratively indirectly suspended by the LTO. So
ironically, Mr. President, we were not able to prevent the LTO from committing an administrative infraction, Mr. President.
Yes, I think nobody raised an eyebrow about this, Mr. President. Ngayon lang natin ito na bring up na napansin po natin ito. So this should not be repeated, Mr. President.
Totally agree.
Pag inulit, let's be more alert the next time, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you for the patience of our sponsor.
Thank you likewise to the Minority Leader for his wisdom.
Thank you, Minority Leader. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, we thank the good gentleman from Cagayan de Oro, our Minority Leader, and the sponsor of the measure, Senator Tolentino.